Did you ever hear about the time when Austria declared war on itself? Yes, you heard it right. It sounds like a scene straight out of a comedy sketch, but I assure you, it's a real historical event. Let's set the stage. The year is 1788, and we're in the midst of the Austro-Turkish War. But our focus today isn't on the Austrians or the Turks, it's on the Battle of Karansebes, a battle that wasn't fought against any external enemy, but rather against Austria itself. Picture this. A group of Austrian hussars set up a camp for the night near the town of Karansebes. They stumble upon a group of gypsies who offer them schnapps. Now, who could resist a good schnapps, right? Well, that's what the hussars thought too. But the party was soon crashed, not by the Turks, but by their own infantrymen, who also wanted a share of the schnapps. A squabble broke out over who got to drink, and before long, fists were flying and tempers were flaring. In the midst of this heated altercation, someone shouted, "Turks!" possibly as a prank. The drunken soldiers, in their schnapps-fueled confusion, took the shout seriously. The hussars and infantrymen, thinking they were under attack, started firing at each other in the darkness. The rest of the camp, waking up to the sound of gunfire, assumed that the Turks had indeed launched a surprise attack. In the resulting chaos, the Austrian army ended up fighting itself. When the dust finally settled and the sun rose, the Austrians found themselves standing not on a battlefield littered with the enemy, but on a field filled with their own comrades. The Battle of Karansebes is an example of how the fog of war can sometimes be self-created, and how a simple misunderstanding can escalate into a full-blown friendly fire incident. So, the Austrians had to retreat, not from the enemy, but from themselves. Moving forward to 1932, Australia found itself at war with emus. Yes, you heard it right. This seemingly ridiculous war was a very real problem for the Australian farmers, whose livelihoods depended on the crops being destroyed by these flightless birds. Dubbed the Great Emu War, this bizarre conflict was sparked off when thousands of emus migrated from the inland regions to the coastal areas of Western Australia. This migration was a part of their breeding cycle, but it became problematic when they began to feast on the ripe wheat crops, causing significant damage and financial loss to the farmers. In response to the desperate pleas of the farmers, the Australian government did something quite unexpected. They deployed the military to tackle the emu problem. Armed with machine guns and a determination to protect the farmers' crops, the military set out on their mission. However, they soon found out that controlling the emus was not as easy as they had thought. These birds were surprisingly resilient and quick, often scattering in all directions and disappearing into the vast Australian landscape before the soldiers could even take aim. The war was not going well for the Australians. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to curb the emu population. The birds continued to wreak havoc on the crops, and the military's attempts to control them were becoming a source of amusement for the public and a cause of embarrassment for the government. After a series of failed attempts, the government finally decided to withdraw the military. This decision essentially marked the end of the war, with the emus emerging as the unlikely victors. The Great Emu War thus became a part of history as one of the most absurd wars ever fought. It served as a reminder of the unpredictability of nature and the challenges it can present. So, the mighty Australian army had to admit defeat to a flock of birds. Talk about a feather in their cap. Fast forward to 1859, an international conflict was sparked by a pig? Yes, you heard it right. A pig was the catalyst for a confrontation that almost led to war between the United States and the British Empire. This is the story of the Pig War. The stage for this peculiar conflict was set in the San Juan Islands, a disputed territory between the US and British Columbia. Tensions were high, as both sides claimed the area as their own. Amidst this brewing political storm, an unassuming pig owned by the British Hudson's Bay Company had the audacity to root around in an American farmer's potato patch. The farmer, Lyman Cutler, took umbrage at this porcine intruder, and in a fit of anger, shot the pig. Now, this wasn't just any pig. It was a prized specimen, and its untimely demise sparked outrage on the British side. They threatened to arrest Cutler, escalating the situation to a full-blown international incident. Both sides began to mobilize their troops, with the Americans led by General William S. Harney and the British by James Douglas, the governor of Vancouver Island. However, cooler heads prevailed, and both parties decided to resolve the dispute peacefully. The British proposed that both nations maintain a joint military occupation of the islands until a formal agreement could be reached. This arrangement lasted for over a decade, with both the American and British camps coexisting peacefully on the island. Finally, in 1872, the German Kaiser Wilhelm I was called upon to arbitrate the dispute. He ruled in favor of the United States, and the British withdrew their forces, marking the end of the Pig War. So there you have it, a war sparked by a pig. A war where the only casualty was the pig itself. It's a strange yet fascinating chapter in the annals of international history. It serves as a reminder that, sometimes, even the most serious conflicts can be triggered by the most trivial of causes. The only casualty of this war was a pig. Quite a ham-fisted approach to international relations, wouldn't you say? Now, imagine going to war over pastries. Sounds absurd, right? Well, not to the French. Let's take a trip back in time, all the way to the year 1838. Picture this. France and Mexico are not exactly on the best of terms. The bone of contention? A pastry shop in Mexico City. Yes, you heard that right. A pastry shop. In the heart of Mexico City, there was a little French bakery owned by a man named Remontel. His shop was unfortunately ransacked during a riot by some unruly Mexican officers. The damages? Well, they amounted to a few thousand pesos. Remontel, understandably upset, demanded compensation from the Mexican government. When his pleas fell on deaf ears, he did what any self-respecting pastry chef would do. He took his case to the French king, Louis Philippe. Now you might think that a king would have better things to do than worry about a pastry shop halfway across the world. But this was a matter of national pride. So King Louis Philippe, not one to let his countrymen be disrespected, demanded that Mexico pay a whopping 600,000 pesos as reparations. But Mexico, already grappling with political instability, flatly refused, dismissing the claim as ludicrous. This refusal didn't sit well with the French, who decided to take matters into their own hands. Thus began the Pastry War, a military conflict that lasted for 3 months. The French Navy blockaded Mexican ports, bombarded the fortress of San Juan de Ulua, and even occupied the city of Veracruz. All this over a pastry shop. Eventually, the British intervened and a treaty was signed, with Mexico agreeing to pay the demanded reparations. And so ended the infamous Pastry War, a stark reminder of how seemingly trivial matters can escalate to full-blown conflicts. So remember, folks, always pay for your pastries, or you might just start a war. From declaring war on oneself to fighting birds, pigs, and pastries, wars have had their fair share of absurd moments. It's quite fascinating, isn't it? How the course of history has been shaped not just by grand battles and strategic masterminds, but also by some seriously hilarious incidents. We've journeyed through the unexpected invasion, where a country declared war on itself, causing more than a few raised eyebrows. Then there was the Emu War, an epic battle against flightless birds that somehow managed to outsmart an entire military force. The Pig War, where a single swine sparked international tensions, and the Pastry War, a conflict spurred by a squabble over sweet treats. It's a wild ride, history. Absurd, yes, but these strange conflicts remind us that humor can be found in the oddest of places. As we wrap up, let's remember to take life lightly, because even in the gravest of situations, there's always room for a good laugh. Until next time, keep your humor alive.